Clear prop.
Star 738, Yankee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear Pleasantville. 1 Charlie Bravo, extra in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and designated pilot examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby, how are you?
I'm great. This week we are all about the Rusty Pilot. With us again on the show, two-time guest, Pat Brown, the Texas You Can Fly ambassador. Welcome back to the show, Pat.
Thanks, Bobby.
This
Appreciate
number
it.
3, huh?
Pardon me?
I forgot this is number 3 visit for Pat.
This is number 3.
First visit, then the live show, and now Rusty Pilot. So Pat's been a friend and I would call him a coworker through the flight school that I own. And recently we had the opportunity to do a Rusty Pilot seminar together.
We did.
And I learned a lot as a not-so-rusty pilot, but someone who doesn't get to fly all the time, and thought it would be a great opportunity to put together a show, maybe 2 parts, depending on how long this conversation goes, to talk about how do we get a lot of aviators back into the right seat, left seat, if they haven't been flying in a while. Pat, you do this all the time. What are some of the things that you would like to share with people that are out there that may have not flown in a year or more?
Well, I think obviously I work for AOPA, so that's going to be the first top of mind thing in the Rusty Pilot program that we offer. We do a number of seminars every month. These are webinars right now. We're not back to doing live things, but that would be the primary. First of all, decide that you want to get back in the air, and then take advantage of the Rusty Pilot Seminar, because actually that provides you the minimum that 61.56, which is the reg that talks about flight reviews, that takes care of the minimum 1 hour of ground school that's required for your flight review. In reality, if you've been out for a while, it's probably going to take more than an hour. And even when I'm doing these Rusty Pilot seminars, I'll tell people, look, when you go and hire a local flight instructor to fly with you, they're going to still want to sit down and talk to you a little bit and make sure that you remember all these cool things that we just talked about, right? So that would be probably the biggest one right there. But they got to make the decision they want to get back into it.
Yeah, and a lot of people come to the flight school and I'm sure ask Wally, hey, I want to learn how to fly, or I want to get back in. What do I need to do? And I think while things have changed, it's really still pretty similar. If you learned to fly 10 years ago, 20 years ago, not a lot has changed. You could probably, if you flew here 10 or 20 years ago, you could probably still fly the same aircraft you flew 10 or 20 years ago.
Pull up and you go up, push forward, you go down. I mean, it pretty much, that stays the same.
So I have heard this, and I actually use it, and it could be completely false, but I heard the FAA recommends that if you've been out for 10 years, you probably need 10 hours of ground and 10 hours of flying. Is that a rule of thumb you believe in or have heard?
I've heard that for every year you've been out, you need an hour of instruction to get back in. That's not been my personal experience.
Agreed, me either.
So I don't know. How about you, Wally?
Yeah, I would say, it's going to be different depending on every person, how much they've kept up with it. Just because you haven't been in an airplane doesn't mean that maybe you haven't kept up with things, reading. There's so much out there, especially with the internet. But there, Plane and Pilot, Flying, and AOP magazines are my 3 go-to resources for learning what's going on, the new airplanes, the new technology. I've got I've got a good friend I go to church with, and he's a pilot. He hasn't flown in 20 years, but man, he keeps up with it. And he comes in and he asks me questions. He's asking me all about the things on a Cirrus, and I'm giving him what I know, which is limited. But he's asking me all about the ballistic parachute and this and this, and I'm going, wow, man, Rick. I said, you've really
clearly still
you have really. You know a lot about this stuff. And I keep saying to him, why don't you go back, get in the air? Well, I don't know. And I'm just like, just do it. Just do it.
Yeah, a lot of that's got to be money and time for sure. But
I
don't know if it was COVID necessarily or not, but the pandemic in general seemed to drive a lot of people back to flying.
Noticed that. I've noticed that.
I do 2 things in my life. I play golf and I fly. It seemed like both of those completely got more busy with the pandemic, and I definitely felt it at the flight school, and I think a lot of people who wanted to get in an aircraft decided to get back in an aircraft or get in one for the first time. which was very interesting. So if it's not an hour for every year I was out, what are the requirements for a flight review? Let's talk about it. If someone's listening and they don't know exactly what they have to do to get back to being legal, what are the requirements for a flight review?
They're actually really pretty simple. If you look at, in fact, you can Google this. Google is the repository of the entire world's knowledge, as we all know now. You can Google FAR 61.56, and that's the one that essentially tells you what you have to do. And it's an hour of ground, and a minimum of an hour of ground, and an hour in the air. And one of the requirements is a review of basic operating rules and regulations. But besides that, it's really virtually anything that the returning pilot wants it to be. I still do some flight instruction. Wally and I are both DPEs, as you know. I still do some flight instruction, and a lot of that is flight reviews. So one of the first questions I'll ask, and probably the same for Wally, is where do you feel like you're weak? What would you like to do? Because if you don't know, trust me, I'll have plenty. But that's really it. It can be really anything that the instructor, that the student wants to do. I would say anybody listening with a pencil in your hands, you might write down Advisory Circular 61-98, D as in Delta. That's the one that talks about flight reviews in more detail than you'll find in the FARs. So 61.56 in the FARs, and then Advisory Circular 61.98, D as in Delta, if you want a little bit more. And AOPA actually also has a piece on that. If you just go to aopa.org and in the search window put flight review or something along those lines, you'll get a circular that we printed as well.
So I know there's a lot of pilots that listen, and maybe this show won't appeal to everybody, but you say 1 hour ground, 1 hour flight. Who determines when that's done? If I'm a student, I haven't flown in 10 years, I come to you, I say, look, Mr. Flight Instructor, I only want to do 1 hour with you and 1 hour in the plane, then I want you to let me go. Is that how that works? I hope not.
No.
That's not what my insurance would say.
No.
Let me say, first of all, the thing about a flight review is not a check ride.
That's correct.
Okay, so a lot of people get a little anxiety when they think of a check ride. I mean, I do. Every 9 months at my airline, I have to have a check ride, and there's a little anxiety that goes along with that, even where I am in my career. But a flight review is what it says. It's a flight review. It is not a check ride. Any CFI can give a flight review. And, a CFI isn't so much trained on how to evaluate so much. If at the end of an hour of ground and the hour of flight, the instructor deems that you're not ready to go fly solo or take your family wherever, he will just not sign you off, if you will. That's a good way of putting it. You're not going to fail it. You're not going to get an endorsement in your logbook that says flight review failed. You're just not going to get the endorsement that says flight review has been completed. So it is a review, and you're paying that instructor. So you're paying for flight instruction. It should be an instructional flight. And then it could depend for each person, I'm assuming, right? Some people may take 2 hours of flight, 3 hours of ground, 1 hour of ground, 2 hours of flight. It just varies by person. But the CFI who is performing this instructional review, they're the ones who will ultimately endorse a logbook which says this flight review has been complete. And then that's good for how long?
24 calendar months.
There you go. So it would kind of reset that clock, and then I'm quote unquote legal, but I still have all my currency requirements, just like anyone else would. If I want to take passengers, I still have to do those things, etc. If I haven't seen the regs in quite some time, and you made two good references to the flight review stuff, but let's say I wanted to learn what's changed. Where would I go try to test my knowledge before I maybe came to that flight review? Is there a place I might turn to if I wanted to look outside the AOPA? Any books, publications, things like that you guys would recommend?
You want to take that, Wally?
I was waiting for you, Pat.
Okay, well, I will jump in. There are we talked earlier off camera about the King schools. They have some awesome videos. There's a young fella who's fairly new on the scene, fairly new as a relative term, named Jason Shapert, at an outfit called M as in Mary, M0, and that's Zero, A as in Alpha, M0A.com. Jason is, probably in his early 30s, but really enthusiastic supporter of aviation, an awesome flight instructor. And he's doing something kind of his version of the King stuff. In other words, it's a little bit more, skews a little younger in his participation, customer participation base. He offers monthly, I think it's a monthly subscription service where you get access to, I think, everything that they have on their website. Sporty's Pilot Shop, you can get so much of this stuff you can get online now. You don't even have to get a CD in the mail. You can just get it online. But those are some ways that someone could begin to figure out what's new. ADSB, for example, we're starting it's our second year now into ADSB. If you've been out for a while, you ADS what?
Right.
And so there's also another website out there called Bold Method, BOLD Method, Bold Method. And if you want to test your knowledge, just on I subscribe to it, and every week I get a quiz.
Yep.
And
Their quizzes are hard too.
Their quizzes are not easy. That's exactly right.
I think they're intended to be the more difficult outlier questions. It's not
right, but
it's not how far from the clouds you have to be in Gulf, right? It's
no, but it's interesting stuff. So I don't always have the time to stop and take one of those quizzes, but I'm not happy with myself if I don't get 100. But those are some I guess some sort of quick and dirty sources that you can run to.
With your amount of experience, y'all both have tons of time, and I'm a fairly young pilot in my piloting time. When I took a check ride, which was just a few years ago, my private, I used a PTS. Now there's an ACS. Is it important for these pilots to understand the difference between those two? Would you point them to the ACS to say, hey, this isn't a check ride, but if you can't talk to these things, you might struggle? Is that a fair place to start looking?
I think so. I mean, ACS stands for the Airman Certification Standards. So it's the standards at which you become certified at, and that's the document that Pat and I use to create our scenarios, if we will. The FAA calls it plan of action, and it's the document that we use to create what we're going to do on a check ride and what we're going to test and what we're going to evaluate. So I think that's a great starting point. And a lot of times applicants will tell me, well, I read the ACS, and I think, the ACS to me is a reference material. It's probably not something you're going to sit down and read unless you're trying to put yourself to sleep, maybe, because it can get kind of boring, quite honestly. But it's a great reference material. If you want to know, I haven't done steep turns in 20 years. What is the standard for a private pilot or a commercial pilot for steep turns? And you can go to the ACS, and it's going to have a whole bunch of bullet points that are going to, I'm not going to say it's going to tell you how to do steep turns, but it's going to tell you to the standard at which your steep turns should be.
And I'm a little bit analytical, and I think I would want to reference that if I got out of the game for a long time, just to remind myself that I do need to understand weather and frontal lines, and there's key points in the ACS that I would have to challenge myself to say, okay,
right.
If I don't remember what all this weather meant, I probably should go read a little bit of weather stuff or watch a YouTube video or something like that. I mean, I think that would guide me to some of these reference materials that would make it easier for me to get back up to speed.
Yeah. Depending on how long somebody's been out of the game, so to speak, we can now self-brief weather. If you go back, I don't know, how long would you say, Wally, 10, 12 years, something like that. The only game in town, essentially, was flight service.
Right.
And now with aviationweather.gov, which is basically the NOAA website, the Weather Service website, with ForeFlight, with Garmin Pilot, with WingX, with FlyQ, with all of these tablet apps that you can have, all of them have features that allow you to self-brief. You can go to aviationweather.gov yourself and download surface analysis charts and progs and look and winds aloft and constant pressure. All that stuff is right there at your fingertips. And if you don't know how to analyze it, if you're reading a brief that says AirMet Sierra along your route of flight and you don't know what an AirMet Sierra is, you could potentially be in for a bad day.
Yeah, I kid with people around here all the time that the more you become a pilot, the more you really become a weatherman. I mean, I think we all learn a lot more about weather, winds, dew point, temperature, all that stuff that helps us be a better pilot. And as I'm sitting here, if you got your license or certification 15 years ago, the iPhone didn't even exist.
Exactly.
So it's a very different cockpit than it was 15 years ago, just based on solely the iPhone or mobile tablets and phones in general, right?
Well, 15 years ago, that might be a little recent, but certainly 20 years ago, in-panel GPSs were not much beyond a fantasy at that point. I remember I was a rusty pilot. I was the quintessential rusty pilot for about 10 years. And when I came back and got current again in this would have been 1996, thereabouts, 1995 maybe, I got current in a Warrior, and it had a panel-mounted, I think it was a Magellan SkyNav GPS. Now, this was not an IFR-certified GPS. There was no moving map. It basically just kind of showed you the bearing to the station. No magenta line, no nothing. And I looked at that and I said, what in the world does GPS stand for?
Why would anybody use that?
Why would anybody use this thing? This is just more crap I've got to learn how to use in the cockpit. And now I fly, my Cirrus has dual Garmin 430s, which in themselves are old technology.
Yeah, they are.
and two screens of technically advanced aircraft. And I never would have seen that coming even 10 years, 20 years
That's
ago.
a good point. I mean, maybe the first thing rusty pilots should do is just learn about the technology, all the options. They're going to see very different aircraft, from 430s to things with glass G1000 to things with tablet mounts that would make the plane, even with steam gauges, extremely advanced.
Yeah.
Traffic in and out. I mean, if you haven't been in a cockpit in 15 years, you might be shocked that you'll see everyone on your screens nowadays almost, which does provide a level of comfort and also a level of anxiety, because there's so many little arrows out there all coming right at me that would maybe overwhelm a rusty pilot, just because there is so much stuff that they might not want to interject, but they do need to embrace it because it's here to stay, and it really is valuable.
Yeah.
A ForeFlight, we keep talking about these things, and some people might not be aware of them, but ForeFlight is about $100 a year, and you have every sectional, every low en route chart, every high en route chart,
every approach plate,
every everything
arrival,
you would buy
every
in
departure.
books,
in
the palm of your hand for $100 a year.
It's remarkable.
And it really is remarkable if you think about how much information you're getting. That's less than 10 sectionals. And if you want to go from here to probably Colorado, you would need to buy 10 sectionals. So ForeFlight's done amazing things. And you mentioned many other of the electronic flight bags that might be a place for rusty pilots to just go do some research there amongst all the other things.
Yeah.
The other, I guess, with that, the FAA is they're still behind maybe, but they've released a lot of things in electronic form that you might not have been able to get access to before. The Pilot Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge is just a couple clicks away. All the books that we mentioned, like the Airplane Flying Handbook, the ACS, all these FAA publications are now available for free on the internet in PDF form.
Yeah, and there's another one actually that I recommend, especially when I'm talking about airspace. There's one called the Aeronautical Chart User's Guide. I forget what
Best
the
book
AC
they've
number
ever written,
is,
probably, for sure.
but it's I think it's 113 pages maybe now. The first one I downloaded was 81 pages, but now I think it's up to 113, maybe 130. I forget the exact number, but this is every symbol for IFR, VFR, every symbol that has ever existed for a printed chart is in that book, and it's free.
Yep, and we sell the reprints here, and it's probably the most purchased book here because it is a wealth of information. One that I refer to that kind of gets kind of kicked to the curb out of all their books is a weight and balance handbook.
Right.
That is it seems to be a subsection of a part of a book, but it really is its own book, and it teaches all the idiosyncrasies of weight and balance and tips and tricks on how to calculate that.
Yeah.
Really understanding things that Wally and I talk about all the time on the value of a aft load or how to load the aircraft for the best economy of flight. And there's a risk management handbook out there. Lots of really good things that the FAA's put together that you can get access to for free and probably help get yourself up to speed pretty quick.
I think the thing to do, though, is to really just to encourage those people that have been out of it for a while is to take that first step to get back into it. And the first step is to come to a flight school. Find yourself a flight school, get yourself a good CFI, interview the CFI. You're going to be sitting next to him or her for some number of hours or across the table from them. You probably ought to like them. So find yourself a good CFI. And because right now, you in some respects, you don't know what you don't know because there have been some changes. But at the same time, steep turns are still 45-degree banks, and it's still plus or minus 10 degrees and plus or minus 10 knots and plus or minus 100 feet. And a lot of that stuff really has stayed the same. It's on the technology end, I think, is probably a fair general statement, is the technology is what's changed. But find a school that still flies round-dial airplanes and just get back into it and get those muscle memory skills back again, because they're there. They're just back there in the backside of the lizard's section of your brain. You just got to bring them back up front.
Yeah, earlier we were talking about, how long does it really take to get this flight review accomplished, or how hard is it to get back in the seat and fly the aircraft? More often than not, I hear people in the hallway talking about, I haven't flown in 11 years and I got back in it. And the CFI almost always says, I didn't touch the controls. Like, the flying part's not the hard part. I wasn't flying 15 years ago, but I would think the congestion of general aviation is different in major metropolitan areas like Houston. Might be very different in the outlying suburbs and smaller towns around the United States. But, just the flexibility of being able to fly, the congestion would be quite shocking to me if I hadn't been in this for some time.
Right.
But then again, the readily availableness of this whole thing. Like, I can go rent a plane now and jump in and fly and probably do that at 20 places here and just in a short drive from where we're sitting right now, right?
And, another thing that just came to mind as you were mentioning that, the congestion and whatnot, and to be sure, that's an issue. But if you want to get your ear fine-tuned back to ATC and hearing what they have to say, you can always go to ATC Live. It's a live feed, and you can choose from any number of control towers around the country. I think Hooks is on there.
It is, yeah.
You go to ATC Live and just listen for a while and listen to the common phraseology that's used, because you hear the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. And sometimes there's a variation on the theme, but essentially you hear the very same things over and over and over again. Hold short, cleared to land, cleared for the option. I mean, these things are very common.
Yeah, that's a great tip. And one that I've been sharing lately because I've stumbled on it, there's an app out there for any device, I think, called Plain English, Plane English. So if you weren't strong with radios, I think it's a great simulator that will help you become better with the radios, that will get you back up to speed as it relates to being in the cockpit and using those radios.
Yeah. We
talk about it a lot around the school, and I'm sure you do all the time, Pat. Can we maybe wrap up this part with the value of joining the AOPA, and then we'll come back to part 2, and maybe we'll talk through all the execution things that we think people should do as it relates to getting through a rusty pilot seminar, et cetera. But I think people think the AOPA is this big organization that what am I getting for my $65, $75 a year that I'm spending in?
Right.
And how do you translate that into value for the members of the AOPA?
Well, the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association is the largest GA-centric, I guess, group out there. 400,000 some odd members. The annual dues are $79. Occasionally, I think we run some specials, but for $79, basically what you're getting is an organization that's dedicated to preserving our rights and privileges in the air. There's strength in numbers. I mean, that's the bottom line. Post 9/11, when National Airspace System was shut down, AOPA actually had a person in the room when some of these decisions were being made, and I'm fully convinced that we wouldn't have gotten back in the air as quickly as we did post 9/11. When ATC was being threatened with privatization about 3 years ago, AOPA and some of the other alphabet soup organizations, EAA and others, mobilized our membership, and we were able to beat back privatization. And if you want to see an example of privatization and what that can do to general aviation, just look no further than Europe. It is incredibly expensive, so expensive that people come over here for flight training. The Air Safety Institute is a part of the AOPA organization, and if you want to, and it's free even for non-members, it's free. But if you want to look at for example, that Cirrus crash that at Hobby 2 or 3 years ago, we have some extremely good videographers that do safety-related videos. You've seen them, Wally. I know you've seen them as well. These are superb training videos. Rusty Pilot, we talked about a minute ago.
I'll interject right there. You posted a video this week on the impossible turn. We talk about it a lot as it relates to training, and I think very differently about the impossible turn now than I did before, because I watched that Air Institute video.
Yeah. It's a possible turn, but you have to know what you're doing.
Depending on some of the metrics that may be in your situation, but very interesting video, and I can't recommend those enough either.
So, I mean, I could go on, and we don't have enough time, and I don't want to make this a paid political advertisement, but I will say this: every organization out there, whether it's a nonprofit or whether it's just a regular corporation, they have their pluses and their minuses. AOPA is certainly not a perfect organization, but I will tell you, you won't find any organization that's more dedicated to protecting our rights and our privileges as pilots. And I'm a paying member. I work for the organization. I'm a paying member. And I donate a fair amount of money every year to the Political Action Committee. That ought to say something, because I could get a free membership, and I pay. So.
I mean, part of it is you are supporting the people that work at the organization. Obviously, it takes money to do anything.
Yes.
But it's a small amount of money. At the way I try to translate it is, I do 3 or 4 things every year. I love the magazine. It's still my go-to. Yeah. I like to get it in print every month because I like to have it in my hands, and I flip through them, and I've got a box full of all previous articles. Yeah. So the magazine's a good one, and whatever you chalk that up to. I make a phone call at least every other year when I get my medical to just make sure nothing's changed. Yes. I use the medical advisory phone number to help make sure nothing's changed. If I was taking an allergy medicine or something, I would call and make sure. That's an invaluable resource, in my opinion, because it could prevent a lot of harm to people.
Yeah. I actually should have mentioned that as well. You're talking about the Pilot Information Center.
Yes, sir.
And those folks there, if they don't know the answer off the top of their heads, they'll be able to find it more than likely while you're still on the phone with them. And if they can't find it, they'll find somebody that does know, and they'll call you back, or they'll reply to your email. I use them all the time. I don't know everything. And there's sometimes you can get into a reg that's just kind of worded really kind of weird, go figure. Yeah. And frankly, I will oftentimes call them up and say, is there an interpretation somewhere? Because the FAA has got a lot of interpretations. Finding them sometimes is difficult. I'll call them up and say, is there an interpretation of this particular reg? Oh, yeah, that's whatever, and here's the link. So that's an invaluable service. That alone, to me, is worth the $79 a year.
No question. And then I think there's obviously people like you that are doing things great in local markets. I think the Rusty Pilot seminars, they're free to members. Anybody who joins probably would get the value out of that one seminar for the year for sure.
And membership dollars don't pay for that.
Okay.
This is all donations. These are grants that we get from places like the James Ray Foundation. Their corporate partnerships, for example, with Sporties, that allow us to do so many things that we couldn't do based on $79 a year. So somebody that's got one of those types of memberships is really getting way more than just $79 worth of value out of it.
Awesome. So as we wrap part one, go out and join the AOPA and start realizing some of those benefits. And we'll have part two up shortly. As always, stay behind the prop.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at BehindTheProp.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.